In Washington, D.C., crime had become epidemic. Gangs fought over drug turf, leaving corpses in their wake. The Metropolitan Police Force was overwhelmed as the homicide rate climbed to over 400 per year. Before officers could stem the tide of violence, they became the targets. A cop killer was on the loose, and police turned to the FBI to stop him.
In 1995, our nation's capital was also our nation's murder capital. Even the police weren't safe. While Washington, D.C. law enforcement targeted criminals, the criminals targeted law enforcement, even gunning down officers on patrol. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. As the death toll mounted, D.C. police called upon the FBI for help. The hunt was on to find a cop killer and to bring order to a town in trouble. But things would only get worse before they got better.
On January 10th, 1995, at a fast food restaurant in northwest Washington, D.C., Metropolitan Police Officer Vance Warren was taking a dinner break while working part-time security. It had become common practice for businesses to hire uniformed off-duty police officers to protect their establishments. Everyone felt more secure, customers and employees alike. No one inside saw the dark figure retreat into the shadows. 2 bullets grazed the back of the officer's neck. He peered out into the darkness looking for the shooter, then radioed for assistance.
We got shots fired.
He didn't know where the shots came from, or if the gunman was still out there, waiting to strike again. Responding officers raced to the scene, but the gunman was nowhere in sight. There was no attempt at a robbery. It appeared the shooter's sole purpose was to kill the officer. From witness accounts, police believe the shooter acted alone. The forensic team recovered 2 .32 caliber slugs from inside the restaurant. No shell casings were found at the scene. Though Officer Vance Warren survived the shooting with only minor injuries, others weren't so lucky. Less than 2 months earlier, on November 22nd, a gang member walked into the District of Columbia's police headquarters with a gun and began firing. In an instant, the police sergeant and 2 federal agents were dead. The 4th was critically wounded. With no chance for escape, the killer turned the gun on himself. Police couldn't help but suspect the shootings were somehow connected, even though there was no evidence linking the attack on Officer Warren to the shooting at police headquarters. The attempted murder of the officer seemed like one more incident in an escalating war over drugs and turf. Metropolitan Police were overwhelmed with the level of violence and the crushing caseloads. With at least 1 murder occurring each day, homicide detectives couldn't keep up. For Detective Loren Ledman and his colleagues, their city was under siege.
We rode the wave of the crack epidemic that came in. It paid a heavy toll on our citizens in the murder rate. We had a serious amount of cases. We had a lot of violence. We escalated to the position of being, per capita, one of the worst in the nation.
It was about to get even worse. On January 17th, a few blocks from the White House, Metropolitan Police Officer Eric Hayes was in his patrol car. A taxicab double parked on the opposite side of the street. While the officer filled out paperwork, a man approached his cruiser. He shot the patrolman 4 times at close range. Wounded in his chest, legs, and abdomen, Officer Hayes struggled out of his vehicle. The cab driver witnessed the shooting. He reported it to his dispatcher.
Look, just some suspect running down the alleyway.
As the shooter bolted, the cab driver circled around the block. Making his getaway, the gunman stripped off his mask and jacket in an attempt to change his appearance. When the cabbie turned the corner onto the next block, he saw the shooter emerge and alerted his dispatcher that the shooter hailed him. Not realizing the cabbie had witnessed the shooting and followed him, the assailant got in. The driver discreetly turned off his radio, and the dispatcher notified police.
Keep straight, man, keep straight.
An APB was issued for taxi number 440. The driver tried to remain calm, hoping police would find his car. Within minutes, cops picked up the taxi's trailer. The gunman barked a new address and told him to keep driving. In an instant, the driver slammed on the brakes. The assailant discarded his gun and ran. He evaded the pursuing officers. Police retrieved the weapon, which held 6 used shell casings, and called for backup to search the area. At the crime scene, Officer Hayes fought for his life. He survived emergency surgery where doctors removed 4 .32 caliber slugs. An officer called in a forensics unit to gather evidence. They scoured the crime scene. Before gathering any physical material, they photographed the entire area. In the alley, they found the clothing discarded by the assailant, including a black ski mask. They hoped clues revealed in the lab could lead to the shooter's identity. Fearing another blindside attack, the police chief ordered all officers to patrol with a partner and called in the FBI for assistance. Special Agent Jay Abbott was assigned the case.
But what had happened up to that point led us to believe that, my God, we may be dealing with some sort of gang in D.C. that's just decided to take it upon themselves to declare war on the police and just start trying to kill police.
Metropolitan Police fought back with forensics. They sent all physical evidence gathered from the crime scenes to the FBI laboratory, one of the foremost forensics labs in the world. Clothing recovered from the most recent shooting was forwarded to the Hair and Fiber Unit. This unit works 2,500 cases a year from around the country. The DC cop shooting case was given top priority. After the clothes were scraped over a clean sheet of white paper, the surface was inspected carefully for artifacts. An examiner discovered a single head hair from the ski mask. When a suspect emerged, a sample of his hair would be compared to the one found. A match would be vital in a successful prosecution. The gun, the casings, and the recovered slugs were sent to the FBI's Firearms and Tool Marks Unit. Agents needed to determine if the .32 caliber revolver left by the assailant was the weapon used to shoot the officers. Every gun possesses distinct spiral grooves inside its barrel. When a bullet is fired, those grooves leave an imprint on the projectile. The grooves from a fresh bullet would be compared to the grooves on the recovered slugs to see if they corresponded. The bullet sample, together with the slugs, were forwarded to an analyst for scrutiny under the comparison microscope. The bullets matched. This confirmed that the .32 caliber revolver was the weapon used in the two most recent shootings. Investigators were now looking for one man. To find their suspect, the FBI and Metropolitan Police called on their only eyewitness, the cab driver. They asked him to provide a description of the assailant to a police sketch artist. The cabbie described an African-American man with a medium complexion and square jaw. The most distinguishing feature he remembered was that the gunman wore braces on his teeth. Investigators contacted area dentists and orthodontists to see if they recognized the man in the picture as one of their patients. The composite was also distributed through television, newspapers, and local business. A reward prompted hundreds of phone calls. Special Agent Jerry Bammel helped work the leads.
Based on leads which we generated, telephone calls which we received, possible identifications from the dentists and orthodontists, we identified approximately 100 individuals who could have been suspects in this shooting of the police officers.
Investigators worked around the clock to narrow the field of suspects.
We were working 7 days a week on this case because it had a certain urgency to it, given the fact that a subject was stalking police officers and attempting to kill them.
Over several months, suspects were interviewed and eliminated one by one. Agents and detectives made no arrests. Thousands of investigative man-hours had led nowhere. Then, on April 26th, Officer John Novobilski of the Prince George's County, Maryland Police was hired to guard a liquor store in nearby Landover, a suburb of the District of Columbia. A masked gunman approached and fired at close range. He unloaded 16 rounds. The policeman never had a chance. Then he took the downed officer's 9mm pistol. From a nearby corner, a witness heard the shooting and called for help. But it would come too late. Officer Novobilski died instantly. Maryland police secured the area and interviewed the witness. There was no apparent motive, no warning, and the victim was a cop. The pattern seemed to match the two shootings in Washington.
There was tremendous similarities between the killing of Sergeant John Novobilski and the wounding of our two police officers here in Washington, D.C., in that an individual walked up to a seated police officer and without provocation opened fire and shot the officer.
5 months had passed since the first officer was shot. Agents were no closer to finding their suspect, and now he was wanted for murder. Washington police and FBI agents scoured the streets looking for the assailant who had wounded 2 of their colleagues. As they continued to hunt, Maryland police made an arrest for the murder of their officer. There was no evidence linking the Maryland suspect to the 2 attacks on D.C. police. Special Agent Jay Abbott believed the D.C. attacker was still at large and could strike again at any moment.
But we felt this person was probably going to try to kill another police officer somewhere in Washington, D.C. or in the vicinity. And it gave us real pause for concern that we weren't able to follow up any viable leads during that time.
On May 18, 1995, while investigators continued their search in Washington, a young Maryland woman arrived at a Prince George's County precinct. Bruised and battered, Nadine McCrae explained to the police officer that she had been beaten by her boyfriend. Accompanied by a supportive friend, Nadine began to detail the vicious assault she received at the hand of Ralph McClain.
So 9 o'clock last night.
Agent Bammel recalls its severity.
McClain tried to kill McCrae the evening of the 17th, which was the reason that she came forth to the police on the 18th. He beat her into unconsciousness. He stuffed drugs into her.
All the information I need from you.
The Prince George's County police officer issued an arrest warrant charging McClain with attempted murder.
Within the next 24 hours.
He recommended that Nadine get a thorough medical examination. On the way out, Nadine's friend pleaded with her to tell the officer the reason McClain had almost beaten her to death. Nadine hesitated.
It's okay.
She was afraid of what else McClain might do if she said anything more. Reluctantly, she told the police officer what she knew. The night the sketch of the suspect appeared on the television news 3 months before, she was surprised to see McClain prying the braces off his teeth. When she questioned him, McClain screamed at her to mind her own business. According to Nadine, her boyfriend, Ralph McClain, was not only responsible for the shootings in Washington, he was also a cop killer.
Her boyfriend had advised her that they had the wrong person for the shooting that occurred in Landover, Maryland with Officer Novobilski.
She provided the break that agents were looking for.
Okay, Nadine, I'm going to call another detective who's handling this.
Nadine McCrae, so reluctant to speak at first, knew that now there was no going back.
I think she realized how dangerous the person was and was very willing to cooperate with us. Because I think at that point she also realized that her own life was in danger now, having revealed her knowledge of the subject.
Agents entered Ralph McClain's name into the NCIC, the National Crime Information Center, to find out if their suspect had any prior convictions. For Agent Bammel, the database revealed that McClain was no stranger to crime.
He had a long history of criminal activity here in Washington, D.C., totaling over 20 arrests. Those arrests were for some petty crimes, shoplifting, but they did escalate to assault on police officer, drug distribution type charges also.
Investigators secured a search warrant for McClain's apartment.
It was a very tense time just to go into that residence with the possibility that he could be there and with all the tension of realizing what they might find.
McClain wasn't home. Investigators began searching the apartment. Survivalist magazines, weapons manuals, and how-to guides for terrorist operations were strewn everywhere. The materials detailed how to conduct surveillance, conceal movements, and catch victims by surprise.
Detective.
In the living room, the forensic team uncovered a black ski mask similar to the one found at the second shooting.
Yeah, that fits the description too.
They also discovered 9mm cartridges, the same type used in the assault that killed the Maryland officer. In a cabinet, they found more ammunition, this time for a .32 caliber weapon.
That's very important to us because the shooter of Sergeant Eric Hayes and Officer Vance Warren used a .32 caliber revolver in that shooting. Also, a manual for a MAC-11 assault weapon was found, and additionally, lots of writings of anti-police type hatred were found within the residence.
Forensics examiners searched for strands of hair to compare to the one found previously. The team took samples from hairbrushes, bed sheets, even the drain in the bathroom sink. If hairs from McLean's apartment matched the hair recovered from the crime scene, agents would have forensic evidence against the fugitive.
There's more in here. Let me get the rest of this out.
Armed with a photograph of a suspect, detectives called on the cab driver. They asked him to look at a photo lineup to see if he could identify McLean as the man who shot Officer Hayes. Metropolitan Police Detective Lauren Ledman was there for the lineup.
The cab driver had always told us that if you ever, show me a picture of the guy, I will recognize him. You hear that, right? But I mean, he said it with a lot of passion.
Investigators handed photos to the witness one at a time. He studied each carefully. When he was handed the fourth photo, the whole terrifying incident came flooding back. He was staring into the face of Ralph McLean.
He was talking to the picture as if Ralph McLean was there. He was talking to him through the picture. It was the best identification I've ever seen. I mean, he's screaming at this picture.
Investigators now had two witnesses who pointed to Ralph McLean as the cop killer. Science would be the third witness. At the FBI labs, examiners matched the hair samples retrieved from McLean's apartment to the hair recovered earlier from the clothing found at the Officer Hayes shooting. It was the critical piece investigators needed to secure an arrest warrant for Ralph McLean.
At that point, we were armed with some very serious evidence. We had the girlfriend with the admission, we had hairs, and we drafted an affidavit for signature for a Superior Court judge, and in the middle of the night, we went out and we obtained that warrant.
But first, they had to find McLean. Investigators canvassed all of his known haunts. The suspected cop killer had apparently fled the area, and agents had no idea where he was headed. Ralph McLean was wanted for shooting 3 police officers in and around Washington, D.C., killing 1. A month had passed since the last shooting, and investigators had no clues to his whereabouts. To find him, they looked to his girlfriend, Nadine, for help. She was under constant police protection since McLean had tried to kill her. Nadine spoke with McLean through his cell phone. He was not aware that investigators were listening.
You want to meet?
Through their conversation, Special Agent Jay Abbott and his team were able to track McLean's movements.
We were able to locate him at one point in the Fredericksburg, Virginia area, and we're very close to making an arrest at that time. But unfortunately, he was able to evade our attempts.
Their conversations continued over 2 more days. Authorities learned that McLean was traveling south to Florida. But he never gave Nadine a specific location. Investigators wondered if McLean knew his girlfriend was cooperating with police. She told them that he monitored the news constantly on a portable TV. If they were going to catch McLean, they needed to surprise him and keep his name out of the media. That meant keeping the arrest warrant out of the national system. In South Carolina, that decision would work against them when a highway patrolman pulled him over for a moving violation. The officer approached and asked to see a driver's license and vehicle registration. McLean showed him his registration and claimed his license was in the trunk. The South Carolina officer, just weeks away from retirement, followed him to the rear of the automobile. McLean rifled through his belongings and pulled out his license. The officer told McLean to return to his vehicle while he called in to see if he had any outstanding moving violations. He also checked to see if the car had been reported stolen. Records indicated that it was legally registered to Ralph McLean. He issued McLean a ticket, then gave him directions to the town's magistrate's office to pay the fine. The officer survived the incident, but authorities had missed an opportunity to capture the cop killer. Back in Washington, Detective Lauren Ledman looked for a way to lure him back to the area.
We were faced with somebody that was mentally unstable, that was out actively shooting police officers. We were kind of at his mercy because he was calling the shots. And the key was we needed to get him nailed down in a location where we could surround him.
Investigators once again depended on Nadine's help. They advised her to promise McLean a reconciliation if he returned.
Hey, you want to meet somewhere?
McLean said he was interested in the offer, though he wouldn't agree to when or where they would meet again. Investigators worried that they were losing the element of surprise.
We were looking for a little bit of an edge, but that edge was taken away from us. The media found out about it. They broadcast his name, his photograph, and so forth, which really bothered us because it brought us to another heightened level.
They hoped McLean hadn't seen the broadcast. On Memorial Day weekend, McLean called Nadine. He was ready to meet with her. As instructed by the FBI, Nadine suggested meeting at a large shopping mall in Northern Virginia, a place where agents could maintain surveillance without being noticed.
What I'll do is I'll call you when I get to the mall. Okay?
McLean agreed to the location.
All right. Talk to you later.
The information was relayed to agents in Washington. Special Agent Al Buckley, in charge of the arrest plan, was notified. He called the FBI SWAT team that had been on standby for several days.
When I heard the information that Mr. McLean was heading back to the Virginia or Washington, D.C. area, I felt that Mr. McLean was coming up to do two things, either to kill Nadine and possibly kill an additional police officer.
Agents and D.C. officers arrived at the mall in Tysons Corner, Virginia. Their first task was to set up a perimeter. They had to be certain that once McLean arrived, he would not slip through. Collectively, the team had decades of experience. This should have been a routine operation.
I've been involved in several arrest situations where meetings are held before the arrests, and a lot of times there's a lot of joking around just to relieve the tension. I'd have to say that that night was a little bit different. It was quiet, and that's probably the first time in my FBI career that I could just cut the silence with a knife.
The team finalized plans and waited for word that McLean arrived. At the Prince George's County Police Station, where Nadine kept in contact with McLean, the dispatcher relayed information to agents in the field. Agent Buckley got the call. McLean had changed the rendezvous location. The fugitive wanted to meet Nadine in Maryland, nearly 25 miles away from where the SWAT team had assembled. The sudden change of plans was troubling. The call suggested that McLean might have known he was being set up. Wanted cop killer Ralph McLean was on his way to a Greenbelt, Maryland plaza to confront his girlfriend, Nadine. An FBI SWAT team was racing there to intercept him. Since McLean had changed the location from Tyson's Corner, Virginia, investigators suspected the armed fugitive knew Nadine was cooperating with authorities. Special Agent Jay Abbott was gravely concerned.
At the time, we began to sense that he had suspicions of what was happening. And given those suspicions, that added to the sense of urgency even more. We weren't sure that he would actually show up at one of these locations to meet Nadine. He might begin to smell that there was a trap.
As they got closer, agents turned off their blue light and constantly monitored the radio. A police dispatcher relayed updates to agents in the field. He kept them posted on McLean's plans, learned through conversations with Nadine.
36 and 51, be 1051 to 600 block of Jefferson.
Agents were at the mercy of the fugitive's whims. After changing the location several times, the team got word that McLean decided to meet at a gas station across from Beltway Plaza. They scrambled to set up a perimeter around the gas station. Agents hoped they would have enough time to secure the area. Once in place, they would wait for McLean to either show up or call Nadine. Detective Ledman took his position in a field across from the gas station. He believed McLean would show up to see Nadine despite suspicions of a trap.
We didn't even know if he even really wanted to meet her. We just felt that he was just trying to get in shooting range of her to kill her. Why? Because she was the only ear witness to this shooting of this police officer.
As the team continued to assemble, Nadine remained at police headquarters on the cell phone with McLean. Securing the closest position to the gas station, 20-year veteran agent Billy Christian arrived. The schoolyard across the street offered the best vantage point. If McLean appeared, Agent Christian would be the first to see him.
Is this number 1? Is this number 2?
Other team members set up on nearby streets, hoping to spot McLean's car as it approached. Pressure mounted as they waited and watched.
It was very tense. Al Buckley and I were sitting in a vehicle together just a couple hundred yards away, trying to direct the activity of a number of people. And it was very tense. I remember saying to him when we were in the car, I just hope that we can get him without anybody getting hurt.
Finally, the team was notified that the suspect had called Nadine. He complained that he didn't see her at the gas station. McLean was in the area, but agents couldn't get a precise fix. Investigators believed he was very close.
This particular time, he was whispering, which led me to believe that somebody was close to him, which caused me to look around. You see, was I on top of him and didn't know it?
Hidden behind a small hill, Detective Ledman checked the gas station again. But he still didn't see McLean. Scanning to his right, the detective could see Christian's car. From his position, Christian also surveyed the area, but he too saw no trace of the fugitive. At that point, a local officer out on his regular patrol approached Christian's car from behind. The patrolman, unaware of the arrest plan, thought the agent's car seemed suspicious.
Bill Christian, to his credit, realized and recognized the danger that the officer was in and exited his vehicle, walked to the vehicle, and showed him his credentials. That action probably identified Bill Christian to Ralph McLean as a law enforcement person.
The officer turned off his lights and pulled away from the scene. Christian resumed his surveillance. While investigators watched for McLean, he was watching them. The element of surprise and the tactical advantage was McLean's. Well camouflaged in dark clothes, he surveyed the car where Agent Christian sat waiting and watching. He advanced slowly and deliberately on Christian's position. Agents knew he was out there, somewhere. Anxieties ran high since McLean's calls to Nadine had stopped. The cop killer continued to advance. With Christian's gaze fixed on the gas station, McLean stalked the agent. FBI agents and D.C. detectives surrounded a gas station in Greenbelt, Maryland, waiting for cop killer Ralph McLean to show himself. The arrest team knew he was close, but they didn't know where. McLean was advancing on Agent Billy Christian from the shadows. Christian heard something, turned to look, but saw nothing. He heard it again, glanced around, but no one was there. McLean's low profile hid him below the agent's line of sight. The killer continued to advance on his unsuspecting prey. Rising just beyond the agent's line of sight, McLean lifted his Mac 11 machine gun and aimed it at Christian. Muzzle bursts ripped through the night air. Agent Billy Christian slumped in his seat. Detective Ledman spotted McLean sprinting into the woods and called for backup. The detective pulled the bleeding agent from the car, laid him flat, and made a second call for assistance. Agents Jay Abbott and Al Buckley were among the first to respond.
We heard a call come over the radio of shots fired, and that the subject is running. When we pulled up on Billy Christian's car, we realized that Billy had been shot. The window had been blown out.
Detective Ledman tried to help the fallen agent before rescue units arrived.
He had been hit on the blind side to his left at a 45-degree angle. He had been hit several times, and he was dead.
The cop killer had claimed another life.
This person had just killed a colleague, not just a colleague, but a good friend, a mentor to some of us. He had been around for a long time, a 20-year agent. And to have this happen was enraging.
Units from several jurisdictions responded instantly. A Prince George's County officer arrived with a police dog and started to hunt for McLean in the dark.
I remember him running up to Billy's car. I remember him looking at Billy and sniffing at the door area, and then turning around and trying to make a beeline back toward the school.
The team tore off into the darkness with the dog and their semi-automatic weapons. They didn't know if they were walking into another trap.
We started into the wooded area. I had my flashlight out, and I remember just clicking on my flashlight on and off, because at that point I was afraid that if I kept the beam on, that Mr. McLean would be able to focus in on either one of us.
The darkness worked in McLean's favor.
We went into the woods in an attempt to at least try to locate which way he went or where he went. And it was probably an error in judgment to do that when I look at it in retrospect, but that's how high the emotions were at the time.
The team pressed on, but McLean had enough of a lead to plan a deception.
As he ran away from the scene after just shooting Bill Christian, he had the wherewithal to call 911 and report that he saw a man with a gun leaving the area in a vehicle. This was an obvious attempt to try to throw those of us who were in pursuit in another direction, to try to aid in his escape.
Tracing the call, agents knew he was still in the area, but they didn't know exactly where. It appeared the fugitive cop killer had evaded authorities once again. He ran through the parking lot of the nearby plaza. The team was infuriated by the senseless murder of Billy Christian. They steeled themselves to continue the pursuit. Agents and local investigators alike vowed to stop the cop killer before he killed again.
Anger was probably the biggest feeling that I had that night. Frustration. I was frustrated that we're all not going home tonight. Billy has to stay here.
As agents Buckley and Abbott continued to track the fugitive's path through the woods, Detective Ledman received a call from investigators positioned in the parking lot of the plaza.
Mr. McLean had run and gotten behind a store and had a large ramp that leads up to the back of the store where there was 3 trailers, and he had secluded himself behind those.
McLean opened fire on pursuing officers. They took cover on the ground and returned fire. Emerging from the woods, agents Abbott and Buckley saw officers being fired upon. They pulled their guns and joined in the fight. McLean was dug in and well armed. Officers were pinned down. No one knew how to get to him without losing another life. FBI SWAT team member Jerry Bammel arrived on the scene. He aimed at the fugitive, but didn't have a clear shot. He saw an opportunity to flank McClain and maneuvered to his right. While police and agents traded fire with the cop killer, Bammel remained hidden from McClain. Then he stepped out from behind the dumpster and began firing on the shooter from the opposite side. From his position, Bammel noticed that McClain had a possible escape route.
The loading dock ended with a railing and then a 10-foot drop wall. And I realized that McClain could conceivably get over that wall and flee into the lower parking area where there were no agents or officers at the time.
Bammel blocked McClain's exit with gunfire. Now McClain was receiving fire from two different positions. He swung around and sprayed rounds where Bammel was standing. The agent returned fire. McClain was hit. Agents and officers continued firing. McClain fired one more round. Then there was silence.
I waited a moment, and then there was a call out, something like, "He's down, he's down."
Bammel hesitated before advancing on McClain's position to be sure this wasn't another trick. While officers and agents waited in the lot with guns at the ready, Agent Bammel made his way alongside the trailer, approaching the motionless figure. Another agent advanced on the opposite side. As they moved in, an officer yelled from the darkness that he saw movement. He was going to fire two more rounds towards McClain.
As soon as he yelled that, I yelled, "Don't shoot, don't shoot, don't shoot," because I was immediately concerned of the fact that we had placed ourselves into a deadly crossfire situation.
It was over. McClain had shot himself with a 9mm pistol, the same weapon he had taken from Officer Novobilski, who he murdered a month earlier. The cop killer was dead, but the price was steep.
This person, the subject, had one goal in mind, in my opinion, and that was to kill police officers. And why, I will never know, but it was apparent to me that that was what he had decided to do for whatever reason at some point in his life.
Agent Billy Christian was close to retirement when he was gunned down. He had worked with Agent Bammel over the span of his long career.
Billy had been a 20-year agent with the FBI. Billy was an expert marksman, a firearms instructor, one of the first members of the FBI's hostage rescue team, the full-time Special Weapons and Tactics team, and he was also a member of the Washington Field SWAT team.
The names of Agent William Christian and Officer John Novobilski were added to the Law Enforcement Memorial, commemorating those who have fallen in the line of duty.
My desk here at the FBI overlooks the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial, and not a day goes by that I don't think of my friends.
Their sacrifice remains vivid and is recalled each Memorial Day.
There is a feeling when you lose a brother or sister, agent and officer, that a part of you is lost, and they will never be forgotten.
In Minnesota, a gruesome murder left few clues behind. A local drug boss became a suspect, but he was well insulated against police. FBI agents and local detectives had to infiltrate a dangerous cartel.
Okay, go ahead.
to get to a pair of gangsters who killed with no remorse.
A burning body in a dark alley shed light on a cold-blooded killer. His partners in crime would tell the story if they lived. In the underworld of the drug trade, even a childhood friend can quickly become an enemy. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. A trail of drugs and money led FBI agents to a murderer who underestimated the power of forensic science.
June 24th, 1990. At about 3 a.m., a St. Paul, Minnesota resident was enjoying the quiet of a summer evening when he noticed a car drive into the alley behind his house. Moments later, he heard the distinct sound of a fire erupting, then the car speeding away. Checking the alley, he discovered a large object engulfed in flames. He feared the fire would ignite his property. He called 911. St. Paul emergency units responded. When firemen extinguished the flames, they realized it was more than an act of vandalism. The object was a charred human body wrapped in a melted plastic tarp. Homicide detectives arrived at the scene. They questioned the resident, but he hadn't seen the car or who was in it. Police found no identification on or near the body. Investigators hoped an autopsy would provide more information. If they could identify the victim, it might help lead them to those responsible. A medical examiner determined the victim was a black male in his mid-20s and that he was dead before the fire was set. Cause of death, multiple gunshot wounds to the head. The examiner extracted 3 small-caliber slugs. They would be sent to the ballistics lab for examination. Despite the fire damage, the examiner found powder burns on the victim's head, indicating he'd been shot at point-blank range. If enough of his fingerprints remained, they might help identify him. The prints were entered into the automatic fingerprint identification system. AFIS is a national database containing the prints of 23 million persons. The body had probably been burned to make identification difficult. With the AFIS technology, it might be possible. But running the prints would take some time. Police believed such a gruesome murder was probably drug-related. The Minneapolis-St. Paul area had recently become a popular import spot for narcotics. With the drugs came an increase in violent crime. Special Agent John Tyndall of Minnesota's Bureau of Criminal Apprehension investigated drug running in the area.
The primary way that people moved cocaine into the state at that time would have been through public transportation, that being either by bus or by airplane.
Police created drug interdiction teams assigned to the Minneapolis-St. Paul airport to try to stop the influx. Agents monitored travel to and from cities like Miami and Los Angeles where the drugs originated. Their job was to spot drug traffickers among legitimate passengers. On June 25, 1990, the day after the body was recovered in the alley, agents were watching the counters where same-day tickets were issued.
These two guys approached the ticket agent and stood there for quite some time doing what we felt was negotiating the sale of some tickets. They pulled out a wad of cash. They paid cash for the tickets. They then left the ticket counter.
The agents would check at the counter and learn that the men were flying under the names Jeffrey English and Harry Babbs. Agents caught up with the men at their gate as they waited to board their flight. They asked if they would answer some questions.
We explained to them that they had no obligation to talk to us if they didn't want to. They weren't under arrest. They were free to leave.
Both men consented to be interviewed and said they were just heading back home to L.A. They said they had come to St. Paul to visit a friend named Ken Jones. The officers asked for permission to search the bags they'd checked at the counter. Both agreed, so a search warrant was unnecessary. The bags hadn't been loaded onto the aircraft yet. Inside the one belonging to Jeffrey English was a plastic bag containing rolls of cash totaling $13,000.
All right. Got it.
Tucked into a shoe was a .22 caliber Derringer pistol. It would have been easy to miss.
It was a tiny revolver, 5-round capacity, with a barrel that was only 1 inch long, and the entire gun was approximately 4 inches long, a gun that could be concealed simply by palming it in your hand.
In the other bag was another handgun. Neither had been declared. That violation, plus the suspicious amount of cash, provided enough probable cause for an arrest.
Officer Moss.
The officer radioed his partner.
Be aware they could be armed and dangerous.
They had to detain Babbs and English before they took off. The plane was still at the terminal. The agent boarded the plane and found the men already seated.
I just need to ask you a couple questions. It won't take long.
In a later interview, English would claim that the money was from selling a car. He said he bought the .22 Derringer on the street in Minneapolis.
And he went on to add that he had no idea where the gun had been. I thought that was a strange response for a person to back away from the gun's history. And that was the first inclination that either of us had that the gun might have been used in some type of crime, simply by the way he framed his response to the question.
Agents became more suspicious when English admitted he was flying under a false name. His real name was Jeffrey Barnes. There was no evidence against Barnes or his companion for anything but misdemeanor weapons violations. Both men paid fines and were released. Their guns were held until agents could check police records to see if they'd been used in earlier crimes. 2 weeks later, St. Paul police received the fingerprint comparison from the man found burned in the alley. There was a match from Southern California. The victim's name was Duan Walker. The 26-year-old Los Angeles area resident had a record for intent to sell narcotics. Walker's death made the papers in his hometown. His uncle read the article and called the St. Paul authorities.
Operator.
St. Paul Police, please.
He told detectives his nephew had gone there to meet a man named Ken Jones.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you very much for your information. We appreciate that.
Yes, officer, my name is...
When Walker didn't return from St. Paul, the uncle had contacted Jones, who said Walker had already left.
It's going to be a big help. All right. Bye-bye. I think I got the folder right here.
St. Paul narcotics detectives were familiar with Jones. They had been investigating him for years. He was reputed to be the largest supplier of cocaine in the region. Jones was careful with his drug business and well insulated against investigation.
Thanks, everyone, and on behalf of the Neighborhood Development Board, we'd like to give a big round of applause.
By publicly donating to urban charities, Ken Jones also portrayed himself as a community benefactor. Police knew it was a cover. Like his legitimate businesses they believed he used to launder drug money. His reputation was different on the street. Among dealers and addicts, Jones was known to rule his interests with an iron fist. If he didn't get paid, people got hurt.
Hold on, I got your money. I got all your money.
For years, detectives had been searching for a way to shut the drug boss down. Detectives knew that murder victim Duan Walker was with Jones before his death. If they could prove the dealer was involved, they could finally take him off the street. But they needed more evidence. Investigators went to interview employees of Jones's business.
Hi, can I help you?
They hoped someone would know about Jones meeting Duan Walker.
Never seen him before.
Never seen this person at all?
But none of the employees were willing to talk. Drug boss Ken Jones continued his narcotics trafficking. He seemed to be beyond the reach of the law. On June 24th, 1990, St. Paul authorities had found the body of 26-year-old Duan Walker burning in an alley. Just before his death, he had met with drug boss Ken Jones. Police believe Jones was involved in the murder. But witnesses wouldn't talk, and no physical evidence implicated him. Investigators got an unexpected break 3 months later when St. Paul police stopped a man for a routine traffic violation. A computer check revealed there was a warrant out for the arrest of Charles Shuck. Police took him into custody. They contacted the investigator who had issued the warrant, Special Agent John Tyndall of the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension.
We'll get it straightened out.
The arrest warrant was issued for Charles Shuck for importing 2 kilos of cocaine. We attempted to find him at the address that he had given, and he wasn't there, and we had no way of knowing where he was at that time.
Several months earlier, a drug interdiction team at the Minneapolis-St. Paul airport had spotted the courier. They watched Shuck pay cash for a full-fare, last-minute ticket to Los Angeles.
That would be one-way round trip. Round trip. Yeah.
Shuck didn't check a bag and carried only one onto the plane.
Boarding pass here.
The next day, agents saw him return, now with 2 bags. They knew couriers often had extra bags when returning from a drug pickup.
How you doing, sir? I'm Officer Moss. Officer Kendall.
They told Shuck that they could not arrest him, but they could hold his luggage for inspection. Authorities could not open his bags without his consent, and he did not give it.
You're not hiding anything, are you?
Chuck's response was not that of innocent travelers.
If you tell them that you're going to detain their bags, typically, if they have nothing to hide, they want to stay with their bags. They don't want to leave those bags behind. Chuck had none of that. He had no questions, he had no concerns. His primary concern was getting out of there just as fast as he could.
Take him with us. I'm sure.
Shortly after Chuck left, a canine unit examined the bags. One was clean, but in the other, the dog smelled narcotics.
You can't get a search warrant based strictly on the actions of the dog. The dog was an integral part of it in the request for the search warrant, but it wasn't the only part. We also had to detail the fact that we had seen Chuck the previous night come in and buy a high-dollar round-trip ticket to Los Angeles, with a return flight being the following morning. These things are unusual. The fact that he carried one small bag on the aircraft and carried two off is also unusual.
Agents secured a search warrant to open the bags. Inside, they recovered 2 kilos of cocaine. Investigators suspected Chuck was carrying the drugs for someone else.
At that time, we weren't able to make a connection as to who he might be working with or working for, but my gut feeling was that he was a courier for somebody at a higher level.
Now that he had been arrested, Chuck learned of the evidence against him. He had his attorney propose a deal. In exchange for sentencing consideration, he would give up information on the man he ran drugs for. More importantly, he would also provide details about the unsolved murder of Duane Walker. Chuck said that the man who employed him as a courier was the same man who had ordered the murder. The man's name was Ken Jones. For every kilo of cocaine delivered, Ken Jones would pay Chuck $1,000. Chuck had worked for the drug boss since high school. It was precisely because their relationship was so strong that Jones did not retaliate for the lost cocaine. But Chuck was not the only courier. Jones' girlfriend also played a major role in the trafficking organization.
Charles Shuck told me that she was intimately familiar with his drug dealing operation. In fact, she had been a stewardess for an airline for a lot of years and had acted as a courier for him, bringing in kilos when she was working as a stewardess.
Investigators asked Chuck if the girlfriend knew about the murder.
Basically, I was a courier.
He said that around the time Walker was killed, she had been very upset.
It was not mine, it was Ken Jones. Irene, are you okay?
She told him that Jones had ordered her to clean up the bathroom of his condo.
What's going on?
There was a great deal of blood by the bathtub.
By the way,
Chuck had heard Walker had been shot there.
you took it from the guy at the airport.
He said the killer's name was Jeffrey Barnes, an enforcer for Jones, and the same man whose suitcase held $13,000 in cash and a .22 Derringer pistol.
He felt that Barnes had shot the victim, Duane Walker, in the head, and that left town the following day after being paid by Ken Jones for that hit. Shuck alleged that the $13,000 cash that was found in the suitcase was at least part of the hit money that was paid to Barnes by Jones for doing the hit, and that the .22 caliber revolver that was found was the murder weapon.
Just know that it wasn't my cocaine. I was just
Chuck knew the caliber of the murder weapon and other details of the crime that hadn't been made public.
So we felt that there was some credibility on Shuck's part that Barnes and Jones could be considered as legitimate suspects in the murder of Walker.
Agents realized they might have the murder weapon already in custody.
see what we got here.
If they could prove it was the gun that killed Duane Walker, they could move forward with the murder case on drug boss Ken Jones and his enforcer Jeffrey Barnes.
Let's take it.
They retrieved the .22 caliber Derringer from the evidence locker. Investigators sent the Derringer to the St. Paul Ballistics Lab for testing. Examiners compared grooved striations inside its barrel to the grooves on the slugs removed from the victim. But their report was disappointing.
The results were inconclusive, in part due to the fact that it only had a 1-inch barrel, and the opportunity to pick up striations from the lands and grooves within this barrel were limited. The longer the barrel, the better the opportunity to pick up the striations. A short barrel like this gives you very limited opportunity.
Without a forensic examination matching Barnes's gun to the bullets that killed Walker, authorities had only the word of a drug smuggler to bring to trial. Agents shipped the gun to the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Lab in Washington, D.C.
The feeling was that their laboratory was somewhat more sophisticated. They were accustomed to doing things like that on a routine basis, and with their sophisticated equipment, they might be able to come up with a determination that was more specific. After it was examined by ATF, they came to the conclusion that it was, in fact, the weapon that was used to murder Duane Walker.
Investigators now knew that enforcer Jeffrey Barnes was in possession of the murder weapon the day after Walker was killed. But they still had no proof that he had fired the fatal shots or that Ken Jones had ordered the hit.
Excuse me, ma'am.
Agents and detectives sought witnesses who could connect the two men to the homicide.
Could you take a look at the picture?
Whether due to loyalty or fear, authorities were met with silence.
One after the other, the people we attempted to talk to would not talk to us, and they would not give up anything. So we were back to the point of having only the statement given to us by Charles Shuck and no palpable way of corroborating any of the information that he gave us through other witnesses.
Tim, got a minute?
Yeah, come on.
Investigators applied for a warrant to search Jones's condominium. But the judge refused to grant one because they couldn't corroborate the story of the blood on the floor.
Information from the pen registers all supports it.
After almost a year, investigators realized that the case would not be solved without additional resources. They contacted the St. Paul FBI's Drug Task Force for assistance. Having worked narcotics for 20 years, Sergeant Tom Donaski was well aware of the reputations of Ken Jones and Jeffrey Barnes.
Both of them were very intimidating and imposing individuals. They had a violent background, and when we'd go and interview people, everyone would pretty much try to avoid either having contact with us or they wouldn't tell us the straight story.
The task force believed that the only way to get to the drug boss and his enforcer would be through a cooperating witness. They needed to find someone who could give them first-hand information and perhaps solicit a taped confession.
He's a chump, man. I'm afraid of him. I got people on the
The investigator approached a confidential informant he had developed on earlier cases.
But even to do something, I can have him.
The informant couldn't place Barnes with the victim,
He got a bad reputation. I'll take him down.
but he did know that the enforcer had a nephew who had recently been released from prison.
What's up, man? What's up, play? What's up, dude?
The nephew's name was Russell Barnes, known on the street as Ice.
Yeah, they moving folks out, man.
After leaving prison, he had come to St. Paul to begin dealing cocaine with contacts provided by his uncle, Jeffrey Barnes. The nephew was anxious to make money. Agents hoped to use his eagerness to their advantage. Investigators developed a new strategy in the fall of 1992. The enforcer's nephew would become their new target. FBI Special Agent Grant Beasy, a specialist in wire intercepts, was called in as part of the plan.
We went after Russell, number one, because he was a pretty good-sized dope dealer. And number two, he dealt with his uncle, Jeffrey, and we felt that if we could get a case made against Russell, that would help us make a case against Jeffrey.
To get him, agents would somehow have to infiltrate the closed ranks of a dangerous drug underworld. In 1992, investigators believed a St. Paul drug boss and his enforcer had killed Duane Walker. They had already recovered the murder weapon. But Sergeant Tom Donaski, assigned to an FBI drug task force, needed corroborating evidence in order to arrest drug boss Ken Jones and his enforcer Jeffrey Barnes.
Just having the weapon alone wasn't enough to get him prosecuted for it. We felt that we're going to have to identify some people or bring some people into court that'll be able to testify that Jeff Barnes and Ken Jones were involved, in the murder.
FBI Special Agent Grant Beasy believed that if they first arrested the enforcer's nephew, drug dealer Russell Barnes, he might provide the information they needed.
We had sources of information that were close to Russell that gave us the indication that he knew that his uncle had committed the murder. We didn't know to what extent that Russell knew about it.
To build a narcotics case against Russell Barnes, the FBI enlisted a trusted informant with credibility on the street.
And I can hear what I'm saying coming back through here. All right.
Agents wired the informant, who would engage in controlled drug buys with the enforcer's nephew. Task force members would record each buy. It was a risky operation. If the informant's wire was discovered, he would likely be killed. Agents wanted to build trust and avoid any possibility that Russell Barnes might suspect it was a setup.
What's up, Ice? Hey, bro. Chillin', baby, chillin'. What you need? What you want? What you need? Okay, all right. You want taste?
At first, the informant bought small amounts. Over time, the transactions increased in size and frequency, and each was recorded.
Bags like this, right over top. That's a nice package. Everything's everything.
But Russell Barnes refused to speak about his knowledge of the murder.
Later.
Agents were no closer to solving the crime. The FBI needed to plant someone closer to the enforcer himself. In May of 1993, they discovered their way in. An informant working for the St. Paul FBI on another case mentioned that he and Jeffrey Barnes had done time together. He claimed they were very close and that Barnes trusted him. He said he was sure he could get Barnes to sell him cocaine and to talk about the Duane Walker murder.
So, you know Barnes really well.
Agents tested the informant's credibility by having him call the enforcer. Within moments, it became clear Jeffrey Barnes was comfortable talking to the informant.
No, I've been out a couple of months now.
I'm still in the business. You know me.
It was the break investigators were looking for. Now they needed to find a place for the drug buys, a controlled environment that could be adequately wired.
I've been eating well.
At the time, the informant was living with a relative and couldn't really do things at his home. We obtained a house from HUD and moved the informant into the house. And the informant agreed to record certain conversations that he might have with Jeffrey Barnes.
Investigators set the informant up in a government-owned house on the west side of St. Paul. He was to contact the FBI anytime the enforcer was planning to visit the house for a drug deal. FBI technicians wired the house with electronic listening devices in 3 rooms. Agents knew Barnes liked to boast about being a hitman, referring to himself as Murder Incorporated.
With that information, we tried to encourage the informant to try to bring him to a point where he would talk to him about, acts of violence that he was involved in and things like that. And this is something that Jeff Barnes' reputation was all about, and it's something that he liked to brag about.
Agents coached their informant on how to draw Barnes out about the murder of Duane Walker.
Thank you.
He was to lead the enforcer into talking about the hits he had performed in the past.
Well, look, I don't want to take too much of your time.
In one tape conversation, the informant pretended he wanted Barnes to help him rob a drug dealer.
Let me go up there and rough him up a little bit.
Jeffrey Barnes suggested that they just kill him.
Murder?
Been a hitman a long time.
Barnes told the informant that doing a hit on somebody is not a problem, and he described how he could do it. He would walk up behind the individual, pop him in the head with a handgun, let him fall on the floor, wrap him in plastic, and drag his body outside and put it in an alley. And this was the exact same way that Duane Walker had been killed.
Look, don't want to take up too much of your time. Let's say we get down to business. Don't stay in business long.
It was good circumstantial evidence, but by itself, it wasn't enough.
Okay. I got your money.
Because the buys had been arranged by telephone, investigators secured a warrant to tap the suspect's phone lines. Although the wire intercepts captured no information on the Walker murder, they did produce details of the drug operation. In January 1994, the task force decided it was time to arrest Russell Barnes and hope he would turn on his uncle. On January 29th, they set up another controlled drug buy with an informant. It would happen at a downtown St. Paul hotel. Investigators wired the room for sound.
You can go. Okay.
The reliability of the eavesdropping devices was essential.
Testing, 1, 2, 1, 2.
The recordings would be used in court. And agents would be monitoring from an adjacent room. If Russell Barnes discovered the setup, they would be able to protect their informant.
Okay, go ahead and give me a signal.
Testing, 1, 2, 3.
When the
Mary
room
had a
was
little
ready,
lamb.
they would have the informant call the enforcer's nephew and order several ounces of cocaine.
Mary had a little lamb. Testing, 1. Mary had a little lamb. Mary had a little
Investigators from St. Paul Police Special Investigations Unit were conducting the surveillance at Russell Barnes' residence, and after the phone calls were made, with very short delay, Russell went to the hotel.
Russell Barnes had delivered to the informant before.
Glad to see you came around, boy. I told you one day we'd be rolling like this. See what you need tonight.
He brought cocaine and the equipment he needed for measuring it. He suspected nothing.
Big times, big times.
To him, it was just another deal.
Two keys, two keys.
He set up shop and began the transaction, unaware that every word was being recorded. It was important to get a drug dealer off the streets. But what agents really wanted was for Russell Barnes to give a statement about drug boss Ken Jones and enforcer Jeffrey Barnes committing murder. When details of the drug deal were on tape, investigators moved in.
Put your hands behind your head. Okay, we're clear.
They had indisputable evidence of Russell Barnes selling roughly 2 ounces of cocaine.
On your knees.
Investigators explained to him that as a 3-time narcotics offender, Russell was looking at a minimum of 15 years in prison. They wanted a statement about his uncle.
Right, Barnes. You know,
We sat him down and we talked at some length about Jeffrey Barnes and his involvement with the Dwan Walker homicide. Being somewhat reluctant because this was his uncle, it took some persuasion, and after a while we gained his confidence, and he eventually told us his knowledge about the Dwan Walker homicide.
What happened with Walker?
Walker.
Jeffrey Barnes had told him Walker tried to steal cocaine from Ken Jones.
Took my gun, I put it to his
So they
head.
killed him.
Pow!
The enforcer said they then dumped Walker's body in an alley, doused it with gasoline, and lit it afire.
Nobody messing with my money.
It was, at best, a second-hand confession.
Nobody messing with my drug operation. And
Russell
also
Barnes was taken into
murder that
custody.
boy, Dwan Walker.
All right, let's go. Stand up.
Agents also arrested their informant, so no one would know he cooperated.
Discovered a 22 caliber.
Sounds like the one I'm working on. Record.
Drug boss Ken Jones was still on the street, as was his enforcer, Jeffrey Barnes.
Just pop 'em.
But the FBI task force was closing in.
Nothing to it.
By 1994, while trying to dismantle a Minnesota drug ring and solve a 4-year-old murder, the FBI and St. Paul police had arrested dealer Russell Barnes, who agreed to cooperate. He offered details on the crimes committed by his uncle Jeffrey Barnes, including nationwide drug trafficking and the 1990 murder of Dwan Walker. According to Sergeant Tom Donaski, investigators had plenty of evidence against Jeffrey Barnes, a known enforcer for drug boss Ken Jones.
We've got a weapon that's been recovered at the airport. We've got Jeff Barnes making a comment to one of our informants that this is how you murder somebody. That's a dope ripoff type of situation. And the actual procedure that he went through when he killed Dwan Walker, and now we have his nephew telling us that he's been at his house, blood relative, that we're going to have testify in court that he actually told him about the murder.
In August 1994, investigators staked out the apartment where Jeffrey Barnes was staying. They knew the enforcer was often armed and willing to kill. He had no time to react.
Freeze! Please up! Put your hands up on the car. Come on, move! Move! Put your hands
Prosecutors did not yet charge him with murder.
Got it?
They went forward with a drug conspiracy case instead.
Let me have your other hand.
Dealing drugs to his ex-cellmate earned Barnes 30 years in prison. They would hold the murder case until they had more evidence against him and Ken Jones. Special Agent Grant Beasy believed having Barnes in prison would make witnesses more willing to talk.
Jeff Barnes had the reputation of being an enforcer. He scared people. We felt that getting him off the street would take away the intimidation factor. against some of these other people. And it would be better for us to be able to talk to these other folks with him being locked up.
The plan worked. After Barnes's arrest, investigators met with an associate of Ken Jones. Facing a long prison term on drug charges, he offered to be a government witness. He said he had extensive knowledge about Jones's drug cartel and that he had met Duane Walker just before his murder. In mid-June 1990, Jones had ordered the cooperating witness to drive a pickup truck to St. Louis, where he was to meet Walker. The truck had been fitted with a second fuel tank. Upon arrival in St. Louis, Duane Walker stuffed several bags of cocaine into the false tank. When full, the tank held about 30 kilos of the drug. That amount of cocaine would have been worth more than $1 million. The cooperating witness then drove the truck back to St. Paul, where he turned it over to the drug boss. Walker had arrived earlier and was staying with Jones at his condominium. Jones hadn't paid Walker for the drugs yet. In fact, he and his enforcer decided not to.
The two of them conspire to take the dope and to eliminate the problem and just execute Duane Walker.
That's Bo.
The witness's testimony would explain the motive for the killing. He told the agents that several days later he got a call from the drug boss. He was ordered to come over to the condo immediately. It was Sunday morning, June 24th, 1990, the day following Duane Walker's murder. Ken Jones seemed very nervous. He ordered the cooperating witness to get rid of the truck he had driven up from St. Louis, the one with the false gas tank. The drug boss demanded that no one be told about the cocaine run. The witness said Jones's girlfriend had also told him about cleaning up blood in the bathroom after the murder.
This picture, you recognize this gentleman? Do you swear to tell the truth?
In the summer of 1995, prosecutors convened a grand jury to secure witness testimony under oath. Jones's girlfriend was subpoenaed to testify.
That would be Irene, the sister of Charles.
But she denied telling anyone that she cleaned up blood in Jones's
I'm not
bathroom.
sure what you're talking about. I never cleaned up any blood.
The Ken Jones.
If authorities couldn't prove she was lying, they might never be able to indict Ken Jones and Jeffrey Barnes for murder.
No, sir.
If you would tell us, please, about the evening.
In June 1995, grand jury testimony from others proved that one witness perjured herself when she denied cleaning up blood in the bathroom of drug boss Ken Jones.
Ken Jones, did you not?
I'm not sure what you're talking about, sir.
On June 21st, the grand jury indicted Jones and his main enforcer Jeffrey Barnes for the 1990 murder of Duane Walker. Barnes, the alleged hitman, was already in prison on drug charges. The day after the indictment, investigators staked out the home of drug boss Ken Jones. Although he had insulated himself well against the investigation, Ken Jones was finally arrested for murder.
Cover.
FBI Drug Task Force member Sergeant Tom Danaski was determined to find physical evidence to back up witness testimony at the trial.
Through the investigation, everything focused on the fact that Duane Walker was murdered in the bathroom, and he was shot in the head there. I was thinking that we might be able to still find a trace of blood in the grouting on the floor in the bathroom.
Bureau of Criminal Apprehension technicians processed the bathroom. After Jones was arrested, new tenants had moved into the condo.
All right, let me hit the lights. Ready?
They gave their consent for the search. The technicians tested for the presence of blood using luminol, a relatively new technique at the time. Luminol reacts with proteins in blood, rendering minute traces of it visible under ultraviolet light.
We were able to determine on the underlayment underneath the tile that there was a significant amount of blood. They were unable to obtain a DNA off that test, but they were able to obtain a test that showed that it was a significant amount of blood, and it was human blood that was still traceable back even 5 years.
Mr. Barnes and Mr. Jones
It was the evidence investigators needed.
are, in fact, the head of a
On October
larger
31st, 1995, Ken Jones and Jeffrey Barnes went to trial in St. Paul.
every year, but also for the murder of Duane.
Prosecutors outlined what they believed occurred in Duane Walker's final
These two
hours.
gentlemen here are responsible for all of this.
Walker had delivered roughly 30 kilos of cocaine to Jones. The drug boss decided he didn't want to pay. That night, he and his main enforcer, Jeffrey Barnes, partied with Walker. Eventually, Walker headed into the bathroom. Jones and Barnes had planned the hit to take place there. Duane Walker was unarmed. Barnes fired 3 shots from his .22 caliber Derringer. As always, Jones maintained his distance. Walker died immediately. Later that night, they wrapped Walker's body in plastic sheets to contain the blood and loaded it into a car. They drove to an alley and dumped the body. To make identification more difficult, they doused the body with gasoline and set it ablaze. Jones used his girlfriend to cover his tracks after the murder. The bathroom floor was covered with blood, particularly the area around the tub where Walker had fallen. She was able to clean the surface, but blood had seeped down into the subflooring. 5 years later, technicians would find it there.
You will come away with the inescapable conclusion.
Ken Jones and Jeffrey Barnes were convicted of murder and drug charges.
Responsible for this murder. There has been
In
no
March
evidence
1996, they were both sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of
Think
parole.
the associations of these gentlemen through the years.
Jeffrey Barnes, who had once boasted he was Murder Incorporated, was no longer a threat to those outside the prison system. Ken Jones had tried to create an image of himself as a community leader. But his greed led to murder, and he will never leave prison alive. On a bright summer day, an unimaginable crime horrified California. A young girl was snatched from her neighborhood by an unknown assailant. Hundreds of officials and volunteers combed acres of farmland searching for the missing girl. The FBI soon joined the hunt, hoping that a quick response would improve the odds of finding her before her young life was extinguished.
On July 2nd, 1994, a 12-year-old girl was abducted from her home in Northern California. Based on experience, the FBI had learned the hard lessons. Act fast, search wide, enlist volunteers. But as the hours slipped by, agents also realized their chances for recovering her alive grew slim. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. Agents and local law enforcement needed to scour miles of rugged terrain to find the girl before it was too late.
The small city of Lodi, California, is nestled in the heart of the Golden State's warm Central Valley, just south of Sacramento. It is surrounded by some of the world's richest farmland, orchards and renowned vineyards. Most who settled here found Lodi's tranquility and low crime rate preferable to the frenzied pace of larger cities. On Saturday, July 2nd, 1994, 3 of its younger residents escaped the heat of the day in front of the television. A 16-year-old girl was watching her young sister and her sister's friend. The girl's parents were away in Michigan for the long 4th of July weekend. At about 4 p.m., a visitor stopped by. A shirtless man covered in tattoos was inquiring about the house, which was posted for sale. He asked if he could come in to check out the place.
You can call the number on
The teenager told him to call the realtor's number on the sign and to make an appointment when her parents returned in a few days. The man said he didn't have a pen and asked if he could come in to write it down. Wisely, the girl refused to let him in and offered to write it down for him instead. On a piece of her father's stationery, she jotted down the realtor's number. She handed it to the stranger, who left reluctantly.
I'm sorry.
No, come on.
Hi, I'd like to go on a carryout. A large half pepperoni.
Since it was getting close to dinner time, the older sister called to order a pizza.
Thanks. Bye.
The closest takeout place was 10 minutes away.
Girls, I'm going to get a pizza. I'll be
The
back.
girls didn't want to leave their movie, so the teenager let them stay. She'd only be gone 20 minutes. Leaving the children alone for such a short time didn't seem too risky. Just moments after she left, the doorbell rang again.
Maybe your sister forgot her keys.
The young sister answered it.
Hi, I was here a little bit ago, a little earlier, and I talked
The shirtless man had
Give me
returned.
a phone number, and I just want to know if I can borrow a phone book.
The girl went to fetch him a phone book from the kitchen. Moments later, the older sister returned home with the pizza. She called to the younger girls, but they did not answer.
Got pizza.
With a knife to her throat, the shirtless man attacked her.
From you and your sister.
He forced the teenager upstairs to a bedroom where the younger girls were already tied up. Like the others, he secured her hands and feet. None of them knew what would happen next. Trembling, the young friend felt the intruder pull the knot from her ankles. Then he dragged her out of the room. In a second bedroom down the hall, the man threw his young victim onto the bed, threatening to kill her and her friends if she screamed. He bound her feet again then left the room. While alone, the young girl tried to work free from her restraints. For the sisters, their situation appeared hopeless. After a few grueling moments, the friend managed to free her hands. But the bindings around the friend's legs tripped her when she tried to stand up. She heard the man's footsteps and her friend's cries coming down the hall. The girl slipped into an open closet. Dragging the younger sister, the man burst into the room.
Stand up, stand up.
He didn't see the friend lying motionless in a recess on the closet's back wall. The tattooed man had no idea where the girl could have gone. Hearing no more movement, the girl's friend risked leaving the safety of her hiding place. The intruder likely figured the child had managed to escape and call the cops. Since he had lost control of one of his 3 hostages, he decided to focus on only one. The kidnapper forced the young sister into the family's car and sped off. The girl who had hidden in the closet found the older sister in the room next door and untied her. The teenager called 911 and reported that a tattooed man had abducted her sister, taking their red sports car. The information was relayed to Lodi officers who sped to the home. A quick response was essential, since the chances of finding an abducted minor alive greatly decrease after the first 24 hours. Lodi Police Chief Larry Hansen was called in right away to take charge of the case.
The agony of having your child taken is a fear of every parent. I think it's a fear of every community. You know, we want our children to be safe, and we particularly want them to be safe in our own homes. So it is the worst type of violation that can occur to have a child kidnapped out of a home.
Officers attempted to contact the girl's parents in Michigan, but they were not immediately reachable. Their parents were vacationing in a remote cabin, so Michigan deputies were sent to inform them of their daughter's abduction. The 2 girls left in the house were taken to a hospital for an examination before they could be interviewed. Police dispatched all points bulletins for the sports car's license plate and a description of the missing child.
My greatest fear was that this case was going to end up like so many others, that we would have a homicide. You try not to focus on that, but you recognize time is really of the essence. And that individual kidnapped that little girl for a specific reason, a reason that we were only speculating, but he knew in his mind and heart what he was going to do. And so we were just trying to do everything we could to recover her as quickly as possible and hopefully avoid that.
The chief wasted no time in calling in the FBI. Special Agent Charles Riley of the FBI Sacramento Field Office knew he had to act quickly if there was any hope of finding the young girl.
Sometimes the kidnappings go interstate and sometimes they don't. The problem is we don't know, and if you wait until you know there's an interstate nexus to the crime, sometimes it's pretty late in the game to get good information. So we generally jump early on a kidnapping.
By 8 p.m., more than an hour after the child was taken from her home, crime scene technicians from the FBI's evidence recovery team and the California Department of Justice processed the rooms where the girls had been held captive. For the next 12 hours, they collected hairs and fibers throughout the house. Technicians also dusted surfaces for fingerprints. They hoped that trace evidence left behind could help identify the unknown perpetrator. At the hospital, the missing girl's older sister and friend, though still shaken, told a Lodi detective they had never seen their attacker before. The girls described him as 5'7", tan, and muscular with many tattoos. They also provided detail of the terrifying events that had occurred just a few hours earlier. The younger girl said that she felt scared when her friend didn't respond to her calls after she'd left the room to answer the door. The girl found her in the kitchen with a man holding a knife to her throat. Instinctively, the girl tried to protect her friend, but the man was too powerful. He forced both girls out of the kitchen to the bedrooms upstairs, and then the older girl when she arrived moments later. The girls said he threatened to kill them if they didn't do as he demanded. They feared what he might have already done to the girl who he'd taken. As the only witnesses, they would need to give more detail to a sketch artist as soon as they were released from the hospital's care. For residents of Northern California, this crime was unfortunately all too familiar. Less than a year earlier, a 12-year-old Petaluma girl named Polly Klaas had also been kidnapped and was later found murdered.
Our case had such eerie similarities to the Polly Klaas case. There were 3 girls in the home in our case. There were 3 girls in the home of the Polly Klaas case. Both suspects were armed with a knife. Both suspects took a girl and left the home with them.
Though Polly Klaas's murderer was already behind bars, police hoped that the outcome of their current case would not prove as tragic. Lodi investigators called upon the Polly Klaas Foundation for help. Created after Polly's death, the foundation assists law enforcement with disseminating information on child abductions as quickly as it develops.
It was one of the first phone calls that I made. I contacted them because they have resources to assist in this type of investigation that we do not. They have their own network system. They have 24-hour gas stations and 24-hour convenient type stores that they will fax, copies of a flyer, and those will be posted so that if people are traveling through, they can be aware of this particular incident.
At the Lodi police station, the girls provided a description of the suspect to a sketch artist. As they had told police at the crime scene, each of the perpetrator's upper arms were covered in tattoos. And in the middle of his back, the man bore the unfinished outline of a skull's face. He had blonde hair, blue eyes, a mustache, and a scruffy beard. Investigators sent the sketch to every law enforcement agency and media outlet in the area. 20 miles away on a desolate road in the rural area of San Joaquin County, a rancher was on his way home at about 8:30 p.m. when he noticed a brush fire in one of his pastures. Just beyond, he saw a sports car, apparently abandoned, with its doors left open. He called 911. Firemen were first to arrive on the scene. A brush fire in the arid region of Northern California can spread quickly with devastating results. They were able to contain the blaze to an isolated area before it reached the red sports car. San Joaquin Sheriff's Lieutenant Mike Padilla arrived moments later.
We received a radio call that there was a fire, and it was a suspicious fire. Fire was on scene, and there was a vehicle abandoned in the area. When we saw the car, it did fit the description that was being aired on a Be on the Lookout by Lodi Police. It was very similar to that vehicle. When we finally got close enough to read the tags on the car, we called them in to our records division. They were able to confirm that was the vehicle.
The car had apparently sparked the fire as it careened through the ranch's field before it was halted by debris. But police found no signs of her or her abductor. They could only hope that they were close by and that the girl was still alive. By 8:30 p.m. on July 2nd, 1994, an hour and a half after a girl was abducted from her Lodi, California home in a stolen car, investigators had found the vehicle in a burning pasture of rural San Joaquin County. The girl and her kidnapper were nowhere to be found. San Joaquin Sheriff's Lieutenant Mike Padilla was joined by police from neighboring Lodi and the FBI.
The Lodi lieutenant arrived and met with us on the scene. It was at that point that we determined that there's a possibility that our victim might be in the luggage area of the vehicle. Although it's a small vehicle, it would be large enough to put a small female in.
The keys were missing, so firefighters carefully cut the hatchback's lock. They heard no banging or screaming and feared what they might find. The luggage compartment was empty. Though they found nothing in or near the vehicle to indicate the subject's present whereabouts, the car had become the nexus of the search, according to FBI Special Agent Charles Riley.
We didn't know whether the victim and the subject were close to the car or their location. We were acting upon the premise that they could still be very close. Our highest concern was to find the victim safely and also to find the subject if we could.
Since the area was so remote, it was unlikely that the assailant had stolen another vehicle and left the area. Yet because he was probably on foot, there was a greater possibility that he had disposed of his 12-year-old victim in order to move more swiftly through the rugged terrain. Lodi Police Lieutenant Gerald Murray was aware that the odds of finding her alive were beginning to dwindle.
Statistically, usually a victim does not live very long once they get in a rural setting and the suspect has control, and this, like it is in this type of situation. So, you know, we were very, very concerned about her living through this experience, and basically we had to focus on what we did know. And what we did know is we had the resources, we had the training, and we had the personnel that were going to diligently search and look for this person.
By 8:45 p.m., the FBI and local police had helicopters on the scene. From above, they would help guide investigators to the girl or her abductor if they were spotted. In order to penetrate the blackness of the landscape, the pilots relied on forward-looking infrared detection, or FLIR. FLIR is a sophisticated heat-sensing device that illuminates anything radiating heat, including people or the engine of a car. On the ground, canine units were called upon for assistance. Investigators hoped they could follow the subject's scents to indicate the direction they may have headed. The dogs led the searchers into the brush, but after about a mile, the trail turned cold. It didn't take long for San Joaquin Sheriff's Lieutenant Mike Padilla to realize that to cover such a wide rural expanse, they would need far more personnel.
Although we're a larger department than Lodi, this was even too broad of an area for us to handle alone. So we activated mutual aid, which is something we do in California. We can activate as many counties as we need to receive assistance. In this case, I believe we activated 10 counties, and the response was astounding.
The San Joaquin County Sheriffs also dispatched their mobile command center bus to help coordinate the massive search. The bus would act as the field headquarters to receive and disseminate the most current information and to pass out assignments for the interagency effort. It could be moved anywhere at a moment's notice if necessary. San Joaquin sheriffs and fire departments provided road and topographical maps of the entire region. Their familiarity with the area would be an invaluable resource to assist the FBI and Lodi police in containing 2 square miles, the maximum distance they could handle with limited personnel. Their first task was to set up a perimeter, as FBI Special Agent Charles Riley recalls.
We didn't know the time frame from when the car first arrived until we were there looking for the victim and the subject. So we tried to set up a perimeter on a spot we could function on. In this case, we chose roads circumventing the area where the car was found. And unfortunately, those roads were a great distance. It was in excess of a mile in every direction around the car, and we had to try and run a perimeter to make sure no one left that area.
California Highway Patrol units, San Joaquin Sheriff's deputies, and the Lodi police conducted rolling and stationary surveillance along major routes into and out of the area. The perimeter stretched like mile-long spokes of a wheel emanating from the abandoned car on the ranch. Several helicopters remained in the air, hoping to glimpse the young girl or the fugitive with their infrared radar. Within the perimeter, teams of searchers began to canvass the homes and ranches scattered amongst the hilly terrain. They considered the possibility that the suspect may know someone in the region. Agents and officers provided a description of the kidnapper and his victim and asked homeowners if they had seen anything unusual in the past hour. They found no one who had, and most were surprised to learn of the extensive manhunt.
With the assistance of deputies from the Calaveras County Sheriff's Department, we were able to assign them to do basically a property-to-property search to, first of all, search all the structures on that property. Second of all, account for all the vehicles, farm equipment, ATVs, that sort of thing. And also to inform the residents there of what was going on in the event that they would see the victim or suspect.
There were many outbuildings and barns located a short distance from the abandoned car. Landowners directed officers and agents to where they were located and allowed them to search every structure. Over the next 2 hours, dozens of teams found no trace of the tattooed man or the young girl. Because the area was vast, officers fastened yellow ribbons to structures at the front of the properties they had been to, so the next group would know that the location had been searched. But as thorough as the teams were, the uneven terrain favored the suspect.
As the teams would come back, would ask them, in the area that you searched, is it possible for someone to be hiding in there? And unfortunately, oftentimes they said it's possible. He would have to sit still, sit quiet, and sit hidden, but it's very possible.
By 11 p.m., over 4 hours since the girl had been taken from her home, searchers still had no way of knowing if the child was alive or dead, and no indication if she or her abductor were still in the area. Investigators hoped that alerting the public at large on the 11 o'clock news would prompt leads. Lodi Police Chief Larry Hansen held a press conference and faced questions from the community, including his own children.
I have 5 children. My youngest was 5 years old at the time, and she was aware that this kidnapping incident had occurred. And she saw me on television. She was talking to my wife, asking questions, you know, have they found the little girl? Have they found the little girl?
Unfortunately, the chief's wife had to tell their daughter that they had not. And as the hours increased from the time of her abduction, survival for the missing girl did not seem likely. By 5 a.m. on July 3rd, 1994, more than 10 hours had passed since a Lodi, California girl was abducted from her home. The FBI and a dozen local law enforcement agencies maintained a 2-square-mile perimeter in rural San Joaquin County, where they believed her kidnapper had fled with her the previous evening. Over 100 officials, including Lodi Police Lieutenant Gerald Murray, grappled with what to do next as they faced devastating uncertainty.
We were really concerned. I mean, do we even still have them in the area? Are we wasting our time here? Are they south of Highway 26 and we've missed them? You know, is he going to further victimize her? Is he going to commit a homicide? What's he going to do? Is he going to go to a house and abduct another victim or get another hostage? You have all these emotional things going on in your mind, and how can we best and humanly, prevent that?
As the search continued in the farming region, a team of Lodi police and FBI agents remained at the expanded command center in the Lodi library. They coordinated dozens of incoming officials and volunteers who wanted to assist. FBI Special Agent Charles Riley helped direct the search effort.
How old do you think she was?
So the search was organized, breaking everybody into small teams and then assigning the teams to sectors of the search. I think it was at least 4 or 5 persons per team, so they could spread out and cover an area. And we would assign areas, usually adjacent to each team, to we cover the area like patchwork. And then they would report back into command post.
As soon as the sun came up, teams took advantage of the light. They began conducting linear grid searches of the vast farming region, hoping to find any sign that the girl or her unknown assailant were still in the area. FBI agent Charles Riley helped coordinate these meticulous searches.
We advised teams before they left that we could find things that would be evidence in the case. We could find clothing, we could find anything that might relate to it. One of the problems was we didn't know what things might and might not relate. So we didn't want to take a chance on bypassing anything that might be evidence, and told them anything they found that might be connected to the case, make sure they mark it, call it in.
By 11 that morning, searchers had covered all the territory down to the southwest perimeter established at Highway 26. They moved south of the highway to an area with even more places for someone to hide. There were fruit tree orchards, thick brush, and wide pastures. 8 dogs, horse patrols, and searchers on foot continued to scour the challenging terrain.
The area is becoming so expansive beyond the perimeter that the job of searching it would be much less thorough, and a chance of finding someone, particularly someone trying to hide from us, would be very difficult. And we weighed that against the fact that he may have escaped during the night, either through the large perimeter because it wasn't extremely tight, or was outside the perimeter before we even got it set up, and which would make the whole search for naught. Those two thoughts were pounding on us all day long.
Hoping for a lead, investigators canvassed the neighborhood in Lodi where the abduction had occurred 15 hours earlier.
Good afternoon. I'm Detective Rio.
Since the suspect had approached the house on foot, perhaps he lived close by or had been hired by one of the neighbors to do yard work.
Okay. So a young fellow came around and
They found no one who knew him,
actually, come here a minute.
but several people did remember seeing the tattooed man. A young girl confirmed that she had spoken to the suspect about an hour before the abduction occurred. He had been walking through the neighborhood, targeting homes with for sale signs outside. Like he had at the victim's house, he said he was interested in buying and asked to come inside to take a look around. She refused and told him to call the realtor's number on the sign. But the scruffy man wasn't satisfied. As he continued to insist on coming in, the girl's father came in to see who his daughter was talking to. Startled, the would-be intruder quickly left the property. The daughter's description of the man exactly matched that of the other witnesses. It appeared that the drifter had been hunting for an opportunity to assault young girls, according to Lodi Police Chief Larry Hansen.
It's become a very difficult thing to realize that indeed there are people in our world who prey upon children, who abduct them, and who kill them, and that they're out there. They exist today as we are living our everyday lives. There are people who are plotting to steal someone's child. And it's a very frightening dose of reality to realize that that occurs.
In and around the community of Lodi, hundreds of volunteers posted flyers of the missing girl, which also included a sketch of her abductor. With the help of the Poly Class Foundation, they were able to saturate the area with over 20,000 flyers in a matter of hours. One of the leaflets finally hit home. A woman and her friend believed they recognized the sketch of the suspect. She immediately called police.
Is this the Lodi Police Department?
The woman told a detective that she thought the man in the composite may be her 25-year-old son, Stephen Reese Cochran.
About the little girl?
From the expanded command center in the Lodi Library, an officer dispatched investigators to her home to take a full statement.
Okay.
The woman's
Yes,
address
ma'am.
was
I'll
a
send an
short
officer right away.
distance from the missing girl's neighborhood.
Yes.
He, in fact, told his mother prior to this kidnapping incident that he had a fantasy of kidnapping a young girl, of having his way with her, and then of killing her. And so I believe that that was a strong possibility.
She said her son Stephen usually stayed at a shelter in town, but would sometimes take a bus to visit her. At about 3 o'clock on the day of the abduction, he had left her house, walking towards the neighborhood where the crime had occurred. He was wearing cut-off shorts and no shirt. The photo of her son the woman provided officers matched the sketch of the suspect. Stephen Reese Cochran had been in and out of jail for much of his 25 years. Less than 2 months earlier, Cochran had been released from an Arizona prison after assaulting an underage girl.
The FBI assisted us in getting a copy of Stephen Reese Cochran's fingerprints faxed to us. We had some good crime lab work from the Department of Justice. They had lifted fingerprints from inside the house. They compared them to the fingerprints of Mr. Cochran, and it was a perfect match.
Police immediately released his photo to the media to alert the public. At about noon, 17 hours into the pursuit, a citizen called police to tell them that he had spotted the fugitive in a store parking lot 25 miles from Lodi. There was a young girl with him who he was screaming at to get into a vehicle. Police needed to act fast if there was any hope of rescuing the girl before she disappeared once more. More than 17 hours after a 12-year-old girl was kidnapped from her home in Lodi, California, police received a report that she and her suspected abductor, Stephen Reese Cochran, had been seen in a store parking lot in the town of Manteca.
Driver!
When children are abducted by a stranger, their chances for survival dramatically decrease if they're not found in the first 24 hours.
Exit the vehicle slowly. Face forward. Face forward. Tell me it's all about? Walk backwards until I tell you to stop.
The tattooed man resembled the suspect.
Get on your knees. Interlock your hands behind your head.
But his ID showed he was not Stephen Cochran. And the young girl was his daughter, not the child who had been kidnapped. The case of mistaken identity was one of many that added to the frustrations of Lodi Police Lieutenant Gerald Murray.
We had reports during the search of the suspect, which all turned out to be false sightings, but still they had to be investigated and looked into, which adds confusion to the whole process.
By now, over 400 officers and local volunteers had joined the search in San Joaquin County, where the kidnapper had abandoned the stolen vehicle 18 hours earlier. Still, they had found no signs, no clothing, not even a footprint from the suspect or the girl. It was clear that even if the fugitive had spared the girl's life, her condition was likely deteriorating in the heat of the Northern California summer, especially if she was tied up or injured.
You begin to, as time progresses, feel that obviously the worst is going to happen. Several conversations that I had with people that were there in the command post, we would sit down and discuss all these feelings and emotions and kind of bounce them off each other, I guess, for our own mental health. And always, when we concluded that, we came with like a second wind, we would call it, another rush of hope, another thing to do, another search to organize, another step to take to make it a good outcome.
At about 2 o'clock, a car approached officers stationed on a road within the 2-mile-wide perimeter. The local man had been so moved by TV news reports of the missing girl that he felt compelled to do what he could to help. He had taken it upon himself to drive up and down the area roads, scanning the fields for any sign of the suspect or the young girl. FBI Special Agent Charles Riley recalls that the residents' effort made a difference.
The searches were still ongoing, particularly in the area to the south, the area around the creek and the heavy foliage. Search was going on in that area when one of the cars going by on the road spotted a person out, and it was an area where we didn't have a team of searchers.
Just after the driver had left his residence, he spotted a filthy, shirtless man staggering through a distant pasture. The figure had blonde hair and was wearing cut-off jean shorts as described on the news. The witness was sure it was the suspect, but the young girl was nowhere in sight. Still, after 19 hours on hundreds of acres, it was the first hope searchers had that the fugitive was still in the area. One of the officers immediately radioed the command post to alert them to the suspect's location. A speedy response was essential to confine him before he got far. As agents and detectives called on all available personnel to converge, they received another call, this one from a Fish and Game officer.
A voice came over the radio and says, "Oh, we got a subject down here by the horse corrals, you know," and it's this Fish and Game guy who uses plain English instead of radio code. So we all just kind of froze, you know, kind of like deer in the headlights. Did I hear what I just heard? Did you say suspect or subject? I mean, subject could be anything. It could be somebody not even involved. Yeah, he sure looks like the guy, you know. So we're all, your little antennas go up, goosebumps and everything. So an FBI agent, my sheriff's counterpart, and I, we hopped in a car and we went down there.
Those who were closest responded to the remote area where a lone windmill stood next to a feeding pen for livestock. With guns drawn, 3 officers took positions just beyond the wide pasture. They watched silently as the tattooed man emerged from the wilderness without the child.
They were able to converge and hide before the suspect crested a hill. The suspect appeared to be heading towards that area, probably dehydrated and assuming he could probably get water from that area.
The fugitive appeared exhausted, but police could not tell if he was still armed with a knife.
Please stop!
After almost 20 hours of pursuit, authorities finally had Stephen Reese Cochran in custody.
Behind your back.
The ex-convict claimed he didn't know why he was being arrested. He said he didn't remember anything about the past 24 hours, saying he was in a drug-induced haze. When investigators asked him where the girl was, he refused to answer. For Lodi Police Chief Larry Hansen, it was a moment filled with mixed emotions.
I was very relieved that we had our suspect into custody, but at the same time my heart dropped because our victim was not with him. And that just really concerned me that they weren't together. So I just didn't allow myself to get too caught up in the fact that we had him in custody. We still had a little girl to find.
Since Cochran refused to cooperate, the girl's location and her condition remained anyone's guess. But investigators would not rest until they recovered the young girl or her body. On July 3rd, 1994, 20 hours after the search for a kidnapped California girl had begun, the FBI and local authorities had arrested her suspected abductor, Stephen Reese Cochran. Cochran refused to say if the girl was dead or alive, or even if she was in the remote region where he had been captured. Though the child's odds of survival in the rugged terrain did not seem likely, Lodi Police Chief Larry Hansen tried to remain hopeful.
Most children that are abducted, we either never find them or we find them and they've been killed. And as this was unfolding, I was certainly aware of that. But again, we just tried to keep positive and focus all of our attention on the belief that we were going to be able to find her.
Authorities struggled with what to do next. 400 searchers, 10 dog teams, and 3 helicopters had been searching for her since daybreak, but failed to find even the smallest shred of evidence that the girl was close by. Lodi Police Lieutenant Gerald Murray weighed the possibilities.
At that particular time, we had basically 2 options. Attempt to follow the suspect's scent from where he was arrested back to the victim, or start a line search from the fenced area along Highway 26 and just walk north and hopefully run on to wherever the victim may have been.
A large group of volunteers had already assembled along the fence line near the pasture, waiting for the word to proceed. Agents and detectives were concerned that if they allowed such a large group to enter the field, the throng would likely trample evidence or might even walk past the small girl without seeing her. It was a critical moment, and like the eager searchers, FBI Special Agent Charles Riley felt the urgency.
You think about the families a lot, because everybody out there has a family, and you try to keep it professional, but it becomes part of you personally. And you relate, what if it's your sister, your daughter, and you always think those things.
Investigators decided that the best approach would be to use fresh dogs to trace Cochran's scent back from where he had approached the water trough. The problem was it would take the canine unit at least 30 minutes to get to the location. But the volunteers were not about to wait.
I noticed several civilians going over the fence into the crime scene area, and just as I began to send somebody down to have them ask them people to leave that area, I could hear sound and see the body language of people coming down the line from where these guys went over the fence. And there was obviously something happening, but at this particular point I couldn't distinguish what they were saying. And as the sound reached me, the crowd was saying, "There she is, there she is."
Like an apparition, a tiny figure appeared from behind the brush. Onlookers couldn't believe their eyes. The girl was alive, stumbling toward the sound of the jubilant searchers. The detective ordered officers out into the field to meet her.
When I first saw the victim coming over the hill, it was like an emotional dam had released. All the fears and worries and helplessness and hopelessness disappeared. And frankly, it took me about 10 minutes to get my composure and get back on track. People were high-fiving, hugging, shaking our hands, congratulating, crying. It's just amazing. This was really not just a law enforcement thing, but a community thing, and it really, really, really showed up at that moment, the emotion that was involved in it.
The girl was taken to the hospital where she was met by her distraught parents. On the following day, July 4th, despite her 22-hour ordeal, the girl felt strong enough to escort her father, a detective and the prosecutor, to the sites where Cochran had kept her hidden during the search. She explained that to avoid detection, Cochran had camouflaged her and himself with mud. He had also forced her to lie hidden, half submerged in the putrid water of a pond. It was too rank to drink, and she had nothing to eat for over 24 hours. Cochran kept moving, never staying in one place for very long.
Come on.
The girl then showed the group another hiding place. At daybreak, she said they had hidden under some straw.
What happened?
During the time they were at that last hiding place, a sheriff's deputy who was on an ATV was going along a fence line no more than 30 feet from where they were located. The victim during that time, though, even under threat of bodily harm, attempted to stick her foot out of the grass area and get the attention of the deputy as he drove by, but she wasn't successful.
She said that at that location she fell asleep at some point. When she awoke, Cochran no longer had his knife.
Okay.
Several feet away, police located the weapon that he had repeatedly held to her throat. Cochran's thumbprint was later recovered from it.
We've got the weapon. Definitely.
After being found mentally competent to stand trial, Stephen Reese Cochran pled guilty to 23 counts, including kidnapping, assault, burglary, and car theft. In San Joaquin County Superior Court, he was sentenced to 106 years in prison for his crimes. Even Lodi Police Chief Larry Hansen's 5-year-old daughter understood the importance of this case.
When it was over and I was able to go home and then finally able to fall asleep, she came home later and was told that the little girl had been found. And she walks down the hallway, goes to my bedroom door, kisses the door and says, "Thank you, Daddy." And when I talk to officers at conferences, I make the point that if a 5-year-old girl can understand the impact of that type of a case, imagine the impact that it's going to have on your community.
The successful conclusion of the case in Lodi, California, together with the legacy of Polly Klaas and the Foundation for Missing Children, became the models by which child abduction cases across the country are now handled. With a quick response from citizens and officials alike, communities are learning how to increase the percentages for survival when one of their own goes missing.